Hello and welcome again to this edition of Phi TV. I'm your host, Brad Swanson, and we are coming to you just a few blocks from Florida's capital during the 2022 Florida legislative session. You know, there's a million things that happen all across this state that aren't session related, and today we get to talk about outer space, specifically Space Florida, with its president and CEO, Frank DiBello. Thanks for coming on Phi TV.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, I've watched your moves for quite a while, but our viewers may have not. They see the rocket announcements, they see the press a little bit, but we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into Space Florida, and thanks for coming on so you can take us on that journey.
Happy to go there.
All right, so first tell us, what is Space Florida?
Space Florida is an entity created by the legislature as both a public corporation for the common good to grow the aerospace industry in Florida, but it was also made an independent special district, and it's very unique in that as a government, an independent special district has a statewide charter, which means that our scope of reach really does cover every county in the state, and we're constantly looking for ways to grow aerospace and its supply chain all throughout the state.
Well, we talked a little bit off camera, right? The old days when it was all federally run, every senator needed their piece. So you might make the rockets in Kansas, you might make another piece in another state, and really you're creating this hub or this business cluster, but it's statewide. So where in the state, other than Canaveral, which is what we typically think about, are people engaged with the efforts of launching rockets and being part of the outer space program?
Well, it's both space and aerospace, and the aerospace supply chain is very broad, and we're trying to make it deep in Florida. And so it's a horizontal industry that covers a little bit of electronics, a little bit of materials, structures, IT and software. So we're looking at all of these subsectors of aerospace and trying to build that throughout the state. We have half a dozen projects right now in the Panhandle, in Pensacola or Panama City. We have 4 or 5 in Jacksonville, a number over in Tampa. We're increasing number in South Florida, and we're taking advantage of the fact that Florida was always an aviation state with a lot of airports, and there's a lot of build on what I call capabilities in all of those areas, and we're looking to expand them.
Well, it's no secret that Embraer and a bunch of the other standard airline manufacturers are here, and of course you've got Lockheed Martin and a bunch of the federal contractors. Now, your background, you were at KPMG running their aerospace practice. So how does that translate into what you do today?
Well, it's interesting. We always take the road less traveled. I was a math major at Villanova, graduated and went to work in Washington, did 5 years worth of defense studies and got recruited into KPMG, which is a public accounting firm. And I spent probably 14 of that 24 helping aerospace companies grow through either strategic means, growing their markets, or through external means, mergers and acquisitions. And started a space practice for them. And we were taking satellites to Wall Street for finance.
The rest of the grinders that were working on ConAgra plants, they must have been so jealous of you. What are you doing today, Frank? Oh, I'm just going to go talk about going into outer space and aerospace.
Clearly was a lot of that because I was in the more swashbuckling side of consulting within KPMG.
Exciting.
But I saw that capital was the name of the game, so I left KPMG to start a venture capital company, and I ran as partner in a venture firm for 12 years, presided over the fall of the dot-coms, and even though we weren't heavily invested in that area, our portfolio values were lower, so I didn't have the heart for another 12-year partnership. And Jeb Bush at that time, the governor, wanted to put somebody into an aerospace finance corporation that the state had started, and asked me to come down and take that over and to help it work out some issues.
So what iteration is Space Florida of Florida's attempts to kind of rally this industry?
Well, the initial space-related entity was, I think, in 1989, and there are literally 4 iterations of Space Florida. I think the first 3, and it was the nature of the evolution of the industry and where its focus was. Launch was the challenge, and so everybody focused on launch. But when I got here in 2008, 2009 into Space Florida, I really took a look at the statute, and I saw that the depth of powers that we had as a financing entity really pointed the way toward financing infrastructure as the tool that we could bring to the marketplace. So we help aerospace and space companies come to Florida, get into infrastructure that they need for their future and establish themselves here. And we do it in a way that allows them to operate here and thrive. Yeah. And so it's under very favorable terms.
So back in my day when I held a position under Governor Scott, we could see some of the things that were getting ironed out, meaning you either had to be totally on property for some of your builds, or then there was the how are you on and off property, and this was related to Blue Origin and Elon Musk facilities and some other tangential companies that would feed that. How is the overall, I'm going to say, legal infrastructure in Florida, regulatory infrastructure, set up now to facilitate more of those companies to come to Florida?
Well, I'll comment on two parts of it. The legislature, multiple legislatures, have really worked hard to create a business ecosystem that aerospace companies can thrive in here, and it's becoming increasingly recognized by companies that look to get out of the Northeast or out of California or the Rust Belt, and see Florida as a great place to do business. We take advantage of that. The other part of it, though, is that we choose to apply the tools that we've got to what we call special dirt, which is any kind of government dirt, even if it's run by a university or town, a county, an airport, et cetera. And we do that so that we don't compete with the private sector.
Right.
So basically, we can place a company on property that we lease from whatever the entity is, and then facilitate building their facility using largely third-party capital. In the last 10 years since I've been here, we took our portfolio value of assets financed from roughly $100 million at the time I started to $2.7 billion last year. And our goal was
that's a big jump, Frank.
That's a big jump.
I mean, and you know, Florida couldn't have a better leader, and frankly, you've got the leadership of the governors as well, from Jeb on down to Governor DeSantis, you know, supporting that growth.
We've had great support from all of the governors, but Governor DeSantis has been outstanding. Yeah.
All right, let's get into some of the celebrity.
Sure.
Right? You just roll around with these guys and hang out, right? No, but all joking aside. We'll start with the big boy, Elon Musk. You've spent time with him. What's he like, and what's next for SpaceX in Florida?
Well, he's a very intelligent guy, and he's been described as eccentric, but I see him as very creative. And he's just one of those people that believes you can accomplish anything, but pushes his organization hard to achieve it, and he finds ways of doing it. He's not hung up on what I call an institutionalized process that is bureaucratic. He wants to be able to innovate on the fly and learn as you go, and he's demonstrated the ability to not only develop technology, but to adapt it into systems and deploy it very rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the thing that stunned me was all the conventions, because when you're in a federal program, all of these other pieces had to be in place because it was run by the government. We had these regulations, but it went to the private sector. I mean, he basically, you know, said, well, no, we're making rock and roll. We're not making classical music. You know, this is how we're gonna approach it safely, of course.
It takes a typical government program 3 to 5 years just to define requirements and go through a development cycle, and then get to a point where they're able to produce the item. And that can be anywhere from up to 12 to 15 years from the time it starts,
right.
Which means you're fielding old technology by the time you get there. He does it in 3 to 5.
3 to 5 months, probably, right?
We're seeing that phenomenon throughout the commercial side of the space industry.
Right. So the vertical takeoff and landing rockets, it's always one that harkens back to, you know, the Jetsons and things like that, but it literally happens every day like clockwork just about out there. How has that changed the cost effectiveness, if you will, of reusable rockets, and kind of what originally was the vision for the space shuttle program but never came to fruition?
Well, the concept of reusability has really opened up the opportunity for commercial space growth. Mm-hmm. And I think we're looking at a decade of not only exciting things happening, but true emergence of an in-space economy.
Right.
Companies going up into space to do research or to manufacture something, to create value, to provide services, an in-space services economy, fixing satellites, refueling them, taking debris out of space that is damaging. All of those are companies that can create value, and we want to bring that value back to Florida.
And really the scale of Canaveral can facilitate multiple launches. I know it's still not a thing that we do, but it's almost like when you go there, you can see that vision for, multi-launch during one day kind of things. It's still kind of, interesting on how they do it. But let's jump over from Elon to the next most interesting guy, who's taking Captain Kirk, William Shatner, into outer space. But tell us what Bezos is like with the Blue Origin program.
So another one, I think, is an individual, put the money aside. He is a space enthusiast. He has been since he's been very young. Grew up in Florida, actually in Cape Canaveral, went to school there for a while. But he truly believes that we have the wherewithal to move manufacturing off the surface of the earth and put it up into space, which would help improve the way of life for all citizens of our planet.
What an amazing vision. Okay, so and I always like to geek out on the actual aircraft and the rockets. What other brands, if you will, are out there and building their products at Canaveral? And I reference Canaveral. I know we're all over the state, but it's the one people think about. So who else is out there?
Well, there's a number. ULA, as an example, it's a formation of, it's an entity that's a partnership between Boeing and Lockheed.
They do the big ones.
So they
right?
do the big ones,
yeah.
and they have 145 consecutive successful launches.
Wow.
So it's something to be very, very proud of. Yeah. But then there's a company like Redwire, which is a Jacksonville company that has continued to grow and is actually building devices. We financed their first 3D printer in space, which was a cool thing for us and a cool thing for them. Yeah. But they're now looking at manufacturing in space, building small components of space stations. They're merging with other companies. We're seeing that throughout Florida, so that there is truly a spread of the space industry supply chain throughout the state.
So the space industry supply chain is what I want to dig in the next time you come on Phi TV
I welcome it.
And talking about the continuum. I'm going to take a personal point of privilege and thank you for your leadership of this program. But I think we also should, if you're okay with this, we'd love to say thank you to Mark Bontrager for his service to you and the efforts of Space Florida, a good friend and now going back to Space Force.
He is going back to Space Force, and I'm really, really happy for him. He's able to make a contribution there, and certainly will continue to work with us.
Well, in our closing time here, in 10 seconds or less, if you will, what do you most want Floridians or the legislature to think about what's coming next for Space Florida?
Well, it's for Space Florida and for the industry, and I think this next 10 years is going to see the evolution of this in-space economy. We want Florida to be the ground node for companies that are going up there to create value, and we want to bring that value back to space. We, as I mentioned, grew to $2.7 billion in terms of things financed. My goal was to take it to $10 billion by the end of the decade, and we're going to do that by continuing to finance ground infrastructure, but we're also going to be looking up, and we're going to be financing infrastructure up there, so that basically a company that operates will take off from Florida, create value, and in a Florida-owned asset, and bring it back down. So they never really leave the state, as far as I'm looking.
No one ships freight more vertically than the state of Florida, and thanks to Space Florida, you've enabled these companies to find their ecosystem here.
Well, we're hoping that we can make Florida truly an interstellar trade port that opens up space commerce, not unlike the way London opened up maritime traffic in centuries past.
Well, big visions, perfect man for the job, and we thank you for sharing what you're doing at Space Florida for the state of Florida. And Frank, thanks for coming on.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure.
That's all the time we have for this episode of Phi TV. Make sure you hit us up on our social media feeds for more great interviews like this one. And for now, thanks for tuning in.